Okay, before we start today's episode, I wanted to give a trigger warning. We're going to be talking about substance abuse and the death of a teen. So I wanted to let you know that before we get started. And I also wanted to say that if you or someone you know is struggling with substance abuse, please seek help. You can call 1-800-662-HELP. Hello and welcome to Power to the Parents. I am your host, Eileen Arreaza, and I'm really pleased to have Amy Neville with me today. Amy is a mom and an activist who has taken the worst tragedy and heartbreak and turned it into activism and awareness about how we can keep our kids safe from fentanyl. Hi, Amy. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Amy, I want to start this conversation by talking about your family. Can you tell me a little bit about them?
Sure. So currently, my daughter Eden is 16 years old. She is in the thick of having a very musical life with her drumming and guitar and singing and all the things that she loves to do. And of course, her dad and I try to do everything we can to support her interests. And then we also have our son Alexander, who was our firstborn, but will forever be 14. Alex was a very adventuresome kiddo, very experimental by nature, if you will. Like, he was the kid that would try the weird food, something like he loved octopus, and I would never have touched it, but he was very interested in it. One year for Mother's Day, he gave me those like dried crickets as a Mother's Day gift because he wanted to try them. So, it was just, he just had a really great sense of adventure about him. Very smart kid, super intelligent, loved to learn deeply about a lot of different subjects and then share that knowledge with the rest of the world. After he passed away, one of my friends said, some university missed out on a really cool professor. And so that just really sums him up. He was always teaching his friends things and adults for that matter too. But Alex, like I said, he was curious and adventuresome, and that led him to a lot of different things, a lot of different paths in life. He had an eBay business where he was selling off his childhood toys because he was growing up and, kind of asserting his independence. And that was heartbreaking, but okay at the same time. It was he was good at it too. He was very organized and did really well with it. But unfortunately, that like deep curiosity led him to wanting to experiment with what he thought was oxycodone. Long story short, Alex was connected to a drug dealer through Snapchat. I'm not sure the details of exactly how they got connected, but I know that's where this person came from. We were a very open family. We've talked about a great many subjects, and we've talked about drugs many, many times with Alex and the harmful effects these things would have on the long term of his brain and his body and that type of thing. And so the summer of 2020 came around, and he was having a funky few days. And I just went like, what is going on? Are you using something? I want to take you to the doctor. And he's like, no, Mom, I was up late. I ate something bad, and it's summer. He's 14, puberty's in full swing. So the moodiness that was happening.
COVID.
Exactly. So the moodiness was totally on par with his personality. But a day and a half later, he came back to me and he said, okay, I got to tell you guys something. And, this is the very short version of it. And it was, I wanted to experiment with Oxy. I got some from a dealer on Snapchat. It has a hold on me and I don't know why. And we sprang into action. We did what anybody would do. And we called a treatment place up in the morning. And they said they needed to call us back with their recommendation. That night he died. Everything happened really, really fast. And that was the day we learned about fentanyl. No one was talking about it at the time. And I still didn't even understand the depths of social media harms at that point because we thought it was bullies and sex traffickers, right? That's sexual predators and bullies. Look out for these things. And so we did. And, we spot checked social media. We had rules in place about these things.
Right.
And yet here we are.
Oh, Amy, I'm so sorry.
Me too.
I'm so sorry. That's so heartbreaking. And thank you for sharing about him. That like those stories were so lovely. The cricket one especially was
so typical of him.
It, I have a 14-year-old son who has Snapchat, right? And so
Mhm.
this hits home for me. This is very real. And it sounds like you were doing everything right. And hearing you say that he came to you and said, I experimented with this
Mhm.
and it has a hold on me. And I think, like you had the kind of relationship where he
We
could
did.
really trust you
Mhm.
and tell you that it means that you were doing everything right. And so,
Thank
um,
you.
I wanna I wanna ask you just about fentanyl. Like
Sure.
you said that this is when you first learned about it. I think
Mhm.
there's still so much more that parents need to learn
Mhm.
about this drug.
Mhm.
It sounds like it's really different from
It is.
what we're used to, what we learned back in school
Exactly.
there,
Mhm. Mhm. You're
So
absolutely right.
yeah, I'd love to hear about how is it different? What is it about fentanyl that is unique?
So I want to clarify that we are talking about illicit fentanyl, right? So
Yeah,
this counterfeit drug that's being made. Um, what's different about it, first of all, is that it's 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine. So, and it's highly, highly addictive. You can get hooked on it really fast, and addiction to it builds really quickly. So, if you don't die in those early phases, you're going to get addicted to it. You're going to get hooked on it really fast and build a really strong dependency to it. I met a lady about a little over a year ago in Colorado who was taking at least 77 pills a day, she told me. Like, you would think that would kill her, but that's how fast it builds. And so these pills that are being advertised in these social media spaces or are counterfeit, right? They're made to look like oxycodone, they're made to look like Percocet, they're made to look like Adderall, and they're just not. They are a binding agent made with fentanyl to look like this other pill. So back when Alex passed away, they weren't advertising fentanyl. They were advertising that they had these legitimate prescription pills, right? And when I first started talking to kids, they didn't know anything about fentanyl. They thought what they were getting was the real deal because these drug dealers are their friends. They really think these
right.
people have their best interests at heart. And then more recently in these listening sessions that I do with teens, I've learned that, okay, the drug dealers are not advertising fentanyl, but they're still advertising the Oxy, the Percocet, Adderall, Vicodin, whatever you name it. But it's still fentanyl, and they're not telling these kids that, and it's taking their lives or getting them hooked very quickly. I mean, adolescents are the fastest growing demographic for death right now in the drug crisis.
Yeah. Um, it sounds like it's so different from anything else that we're used to, and it's so important to recognize that as a starting place when we want to talk to our kids about it.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. And it's interesting because I meet a lot of parents, right? The first thing we have to overcome in the education and awareness space is stigma. Like, parents,
Right,
we don't have a drug problem in my house. This isn't ever going to happen. Well, it doesn't take a traditional drug problem. It's just that experimental phase that no kid has ever died in until the last few years, right? It,
right,
it, and so we need to get parents to start thinking about it's not my kid until it is my kid, right?
right.
And if it's not their kid, it's going to be their friend, it's going to be their cousin, it's going to be a neighbor. It is going to impact their life in one way or another at this day and age. Just to give you some perspective, is in the 20-year period. So from 2020 to 2019, that 20-year period, the United States had about 407,000 drug-related deaths. By the time we get from 2021 to the end of this year, we'll have beat that number in 4 years.
Wow.
It's
Right.
outrageous. And that is the power of fentanyl.
Yeah. It is mostly fentanyl related. Those
Yes, about
those that
70% of the drug deaths are fentanyl related.
that is so scary.
It's
Okay, so you've mentioned a couple of times that you are talking to teens, that you're talking to parents.
mhm.
You really did turn your grief into action.
Yeah.
Can you talk to me a little bit about that, what that process looked like for you?
Sure, sure. So Alex died, and I we were in shock, right? Death totally blindsided us. Like, the thought of him dying that night just didn't even occur to me because we were going to get him help, and this is a prescription, and
Right.
it just wasn't on the radar. And so I was like, we have to tell other people that this happened. Like, right out of the gate, I was honest that Alex died from drugs. When we told people he died, I was 100% upfront about it because I was terrified of it happening to their kids. In
Right.
fact, at noon, the day that Alex died, one of his friends texted him like, "Hey, do you know where I can get a Xanax?" Like they were that
Wow.
close, it's that close. Like it was terrifying. And then the next
I just
time
want to say that takes so much courage. It's like, as a
it's
mom,
hard. It was,
hard.
but how do you not,
So,
how do we not,
how do you
right?
not?
Because like lives are at stake. Like I live in this, it's the whole fight or flight thing, right? Every day I wake up and like lives are at stake and I
Yeah.
have to tell somebody. So it's probably an unhealthy compulsion that I have, because I know I can't get to everybody, but I'm going to try really hard. Um, so the first time I spoke publicly about it was at Alexander's funeral. I
Mm.
talked about fentanyl. Told his friends, like, please reach out to us. Let us help you if you're struggling, because something needed to be done. But, I was still met with that, oh, not my kid. And then I was like,
Right.
well, my kid did it. So what does that even mean to you? I had a real
Right.
attitude problem about it, but I got better about responding to people who would say that to me. But even still, like even maybe from this podcast, I get people who will comment awful things about our family. I don't read the comments on anything. That's a number one rule. Or they'll email me and tell me that I'm an awful parent. My kid's dead because of me. Like I'm not beating myself up every day, right? But the reality is, this is
Not
a
true.
very different drug problem than what we were taught, right? Because when Alex came to us and told us what was going on, our assumption is somebody stole grandma's pills and is selling them to friends, because that's what the narrative
Right.
was. That's what it's been for years and years and years. And we really have to get people to start looking at this differently, and that this isn't the user's fault because they're a pill popper or whatever the case may be. Because you know what? Alex didn't ask for fentanyl. He thought he was
Right.
getting an oxycodone, and this drug dealer knew that his drugs were deadly. He knew that they were fentanyl, and he took away Alexander's power to make an informed decision.
Right. So what do you say to parents who say to you, "Oh, not my kid," and they're kind of have their head in the sand? What would you say to parents on this who are listening to this podcast right now about how they should
I will
manage
tell
this?
I will tell them straight up. I'm like, "This is not my kid." And I'm like, "You're right. It might not be your kid, but it could be your kid's best friend, and it could be a relative. And this is why you need to know these things." And then they can think about it. It's a lot easier to think about it if they think about it in terms of, this could happen to somebody else rather than in my own house. And so it's kind of disassociating, right? A little bit, but it opens the door to that conversation. And another thing that I do is I refer to Alexander's death as a fentanyl poisoning instead of overdose, because the word overdose is heavily stigmatized. I mean, personally, I feel if anybody dies from drugs, it's a poisoning, because
Yeah.
I always ask adults, like, well, what's the recommended dose of heroin? And they all look at me and like,
Right.
there isn't one, right? So how do you
Right. Right. Right.
overdose
Right.
on something there's no dosing for? But when I say poisoning, parents will be like, wait, what do you mean by that? And that's
Right.
because we're conditioned as parents to protect our kid from a poisoning, right? What do we do when we're pregnant and getting the house ready for our babies? Or they start crawling. We're putting locks on the cabinets. We're moving the poisons up high. We've got poison control's phone number on speed dial. It's a relatable term that makes sense to us, and it breaks down that stigma and opens the door for me to have that conversation.
I hadn't thought about it that way. That's really smart. Okay. So what can we do about it as
Oh
parents?
my gosh. Um, there's a lot of different legislation and things going on out there, but at the end of the day, I really think it's education and awareness that is going to get us through this. And I firmly believe that it's our young people who are going to be the ones looking out for each other, right? So we have to educate them. Again, maybe we're not educating them because they need it. They personally might take something, but it's going to be their friend. And so when I go and I do school presentations, I'll tell these kiddos, um, I give them resource phone numbers. And I always tell them, it might not be you that
Mhm.
needs it, but your friend that's pouring their heart out to you might need it. And now you've got a resource to send them to, right? Uh, and then same thing with the education. I tell them, like, you know, it might not be you, but you might be at a party, and maybe you're the voice of reason in your friend group, and you can stop this from happening. And like, that's a huge burden to bear, but they're there. They're on the
Right.
front lines of this. They tell me this all the time. And then the other thing I tell them is that if you know somebody who's in this space already, you have got to tell someone. We're talking about life or death. This isn't telling on your friend for stealing a candy bar from the convenience store. I don't care about that. This is about saving their life, and you have got to tell your trusted adult.
Right. It seems like it's so tricky because it sounds like for a lot of these kids, there's like a mental health component or a
Hmm.
physical pain component or something that
Hmm.
they're hoping to get medication, but it's
Hmm.
laced with fentanyl.
Yeah.
So how do we hold both of those things? Like you really do need help with this issue that you have,
Hmm.
and maybe you don't have access to the medication, or you don't
Hmm.
know who to talk to about it, and you go this roundabout way and you end up getting in much more
You're
trouble by
you're right, and
yeah.
so I do talk about that with youth. I start with youth on that topic, and I my adult presentation, my youth one is almost the same actually, because I like them to get the same information, right? Uh, but in
Yeah.
my presentation, I do actually have two youth who were self-medicating, self-diagnosing, and getting medication for what they thought was a for an actual real physical problem they were having, but it obviously wasn't what they thought it was going to be. And so the thing that I come up against with our youth when I do these listening sessions, when it comes to those types of scenarios, is that, well, they're my friend, they'd never do that to me.
Mhm.
And that is a tough hill to climb right there, because that I can come and give them a presentation that day, but I'm not going to be there when that drug dealer is like, oh, come on, you can trust me, I'm your friend. That I don't have an answer to that, other than, when I talk to these kiddos, I tell them, like, anybody that's offering you drugs, even if they've been your best friend since preschool, they do not have your best interest at heart, and it's time to reevaluate that relationship. It
Yeah.
is That is a tough one. If you have a magic answer, I'm open to ideas all the time on that topic.
I don't have a magic answer. And I also think about, you mentioned you started off by talking about how curious your son was and how much he
Hmm.
was interested in experimentation. And
Hmm.
experimentation is part of adolescence, right?
It
And
is.
definitely not condoning drug use by any means, but
Right.
it's so much more dangerous now because you can't
Hmm.
experiment at all without running the risk of fentanyl. And so again, it sort of goes contrary to like the nature of
Hmm.
young people, which is to like try new things. So yeah, I'm curious about whether you've had those
Our
conversations.
kids don't like to listen to us, right? Oh, and you probably deal with this
Right.
with your 14-year-old. It's like, your mom,
Mhm.
you're telling me this, so it's not real, right? So,
Right.
third party,
Right.
bring in a third party, get some help. We actually have some educational films on our website that Come Back Home is our most recent one. It is the fentanyl crisis from the youth perspective. And then Dead on Arrival is our first film that came out in 2021 that is from parents who've been impacted. But they're great educational pieces that can make it real for somebody. And recently I was in a school, because I've had people tell me, oh, kids don't respond to scare tactics. I'm like, no, no, no. This isn't a scare tactic. It just happens to be that the truth is really scary. And we need to
Right.
tell our kids the truth. And I think that is a huge breakdown. Um, so a lot of adults don't want to talk about this because they think that we're just trying to scare them, right?
Right.
I meet a lot of people who, well, if we talk about this, then people in our community are going to think we have a drug problem. Every community has some level of a drug problem. Like, don't wait and be reactive. Let's be proactive about it. And so those are other obstacles we have to overcome. And slowly but surely, we chip away at it and try to overcome those objections as best we can. But for parents that want to do something in their own home, I mean, our films are only 20 to 25 minutes long. Really, they're quick and easy to watch, and I'm always available to help. Like, reach out to me, email
Yeah.
me. I will talk to anyone and everyone that needs help with this.
Yeah. So I'd love to hear more about. So you have started a foundation.
Hmm.
Um, can you tell me more about that
Sure.
and the work that you're doing
So
through?
after Alex died, it was that we have to do something. And right out of the gate, my sister filed paperwork and everything for us to have the Alexander Neville Foundation. Like, my family was amazing in the early days of getting everything set up. And from there, I've met some amazing people who've helped us out along the way. And I just literally started with one presentation to a group of parents, and and it has spiraled from there. Like, if we were a traditional business is booming.
Hmm.
But we're not. And I'd rather go back in time and have the life that I thought I was going to have. Like, you could put 10,000 people in front of me and say, these are the lives you've saved, or you could have Alex back. I'd take Alex every time. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just, I want my kid. Sorry. Excuse me.
I would too.
So we start off, after I started off meeting with all kinds of experts on this subject, right? Law enforcement, doctors, psychologists, you name it. I talked to them, and I was ready to like create presentations and content and get the ball rolling. But when I went to do that, something was still missing, and that was the youth perspective. And so from
Mm.
there, I was like, I got to talk to teens. And so I started meeting with teens on a regular basis. About once every 3 months, I will meet with a group of teens that want to. Anybody and every teen is welcome, and they tell me what's going on. They give it to me straight too. And that all started with a kid in that very first listening session said to me, first, he's like, we're always being told just to say no. We don't even know what we're supposed to say no to. So it doesn't seem like a big deal.
Mm.
And two, he said, when it comes to talking to us, don't bullshit me. And
Yeah.
I was like, okay, deal. You have a deal. And so
Yeah.
that's the position we've taken on this. We just take what these kids tell us, put it into presentation form, and let people know that this is what's happening with our kids. This is what they're dealing with. They feel really minimized by their parents these days because everybody's so busy, and 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 they need us to be there for them a little bit more
Yeah.
than we might be. And I know it's a struggle in every household, right? Because we all have jobs, and our kids need to get here and there, and they're doing their own thing, and then they don't even want to talk to us because they're
Right.
teenagers,
Right.
and it's hard to get through. But so when those little moments arise where they're like, hey mom, hey dad, I had a bad day, we need to stop and hear about that bad day, do everything we can to take those moments and listen.
Yeah. I'd love to hear just what else you're hearing from teens, because when I think about fentanyl, for example, I think about the things I've heard in the news, which it's deadly, all
Mm-hmm.
of that. But then I
Mm-hmm.
remember a few years ago there was all the rage about rainbow fent and like
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
Skittles that looked like fentanyl.
Yeah.
And then I remember there was a little bit of that scare around Halloween and some of that stuff to me feels like it's misinformation.
Well, yeah,
But I don't
you would
know.
be.
I'm
I
curious.
think you would be correct. Back when the Halloween time was coming, I had several news stations reach out to me, and they literally wanted me to go on TV, like, "Oh no, drug dealers are putting fentanyl in our Halloween candy," and I'm like, "That's just not a thing."
Right.
Um, what's more likely to happen is that somebody in the household, and I've heard this. Sorry, I do not a lot, but I've done some elementary school presentations, and it's a very different approach with the elementary schools. We talk about making healthy choices for our brain and our body, and then also different pictures of things. Is this a good choice for our brain and our body? And it's a whole different thing. But I will show a picture of the rainbow colored, the friendly colored fentanyl pills, and kindergarten through fifth grade, they'll look at them. And some of the kids will say, "Hey, that's candy," and some of the kids will be like, "No, that's that's drugs. That's bad. We're not supposed to touch that." So these kids already know. Or more heartbreaking is when, "Oh yeah, my uncle sells those pills," or I saw my brother and his friends with those pills, and they made me not to tell mom and dad. So what's most likely going to happen, was starting to say, was that somebody in the household is going to have it, and these kids are going to think it's one thing and it's not. And that's where the harm comes in. I was in a school district in California, and I was giving data to the parents, and that previous year they had 4 children under the age of 5 die from fentanyl. How does that
Wow.
happen, right? It's that exact scenario. They see it, they think it's candy, and they lose their life.
Wow, that is really, really heartbreaking and so difficult. And again, so different from everything we grew up
Mm-hmm.
thinking and knowing about
Mm-hmm.
drugs. It's such a challenge, and it's so important for people to become educated about this. Um, okay, I want to talk to you a little bit about Snapchat,
Sure.
because that's, as I mentioned, I also have a 14-year-old. He uses Snapchat. It's it's such a point of tension for us
I
in this
bet.
work that I do. I have
Mm-hmm.
heard about the danger of it, and he's also like, "Mom, all my friends are on there. That's where my study group is. That's how I communicate with my math study group, and how I find out what the homework is, and all of these things." And it's also a place where kids are being able to access
Mm-hmm.
um, drugs like this. So I'd love to hear about the connection between
Yeah.
Snapchat and fentanyl and the work that you've done to try to bring awareness to that.
So, when Alex first told us he got it from a dealer on Snapchat, I didn't really think much of it in that moment, right? It didn't mean much to me because we did spot check his social media and would scroll through things, and that was part of the deal. But at the time, the drug emoji code wasn't out there. Like, people can type in DEA drug emoji code and it'll pop right up and you can see that. So had I seen those emojis in somebody's profile or whatnot, I wouldn't have known what I was looking at. So,
Mm,
we got to know what we're looking at. So that takes a little education on us parents, right? We have to go out and learn about these things. Uh, but what happens is these drug dealers can reach out to our kids, just straight up become friends with them on there. And once you kind of have that person in your circle, more and more will come up. Drug content will start to show up in your For You feed, and it starts to look normalized. On day one, our kids might be like, oh, wow, this is crazy and weird. But after 30 days of stuff like that, it looks normal. They become
right.
desensitized to it. We've all been there, right? And so it doesn't seem like such a big deal to them. And then they can private message them a lot of times. I've worked with people who have kind of gone undercover on Snapchat to see what's going on, and they'll send me the screenshots. And so the conversation might start on, it could even start on a totally different platform, but it always ends up going back to @Snap. Hit me up at Snap. And that's because of the anonymity that happens on that platform. And
Mm,
that's why teens love it. That's why drug dealers love it. That's why any
right.
perpetrator likes that platform. So one of the folks that I was working with online she was kind of undercover on Snapchat, seeing how long it would take for a drug dealer to contact her and whatnot. She actually was talking to a drug dealer. It started in the public space and then it moved to their direct messages. And then she ends up saying, okay, thanks, I don't want anything. Well, then he started pressuring her and pressuring her and pressuring her. And then she was a grown woman, but she's like, it made her scared. And she's like, I want to just buy something so he'll leave me alone, but then it's illegal to buy something. So can you imagine being 15 years old and feeling that pressure? And then you might just do it because you think you're going to get this person off your back, and it's just going to make things worse. But I can see that happening. So through these listening sessions with the teens, another thing I've learned is that it's not just teens seeking out drugs. Like, I was naive. I've learned how naive I am in the grand scheme of the world through all of this work. But somebody wants drugs, they're going to go find the plug, the hookup, whatever we're calling them these days. But there's also a whole other avenue where a drug dealer becomes our kid's friend on Snapchat or other places too, and builds them up. Our teens are vulnerable. They want to be treated more grown up. They want to have more clout. And these drug dealers will fill that void. They'll tell them how smart and funny and amazing they are, how they're stylish, their friends really like them. And 30 days later, our kids are doing things we never thought they'd do before because they think this person's our friend. They made them feel really good. So why would this person do bad things to them? Another thing that's come up is somebody puts up, my dog died today. I'm super duper sad. And then the drug dealer slides right into their DMs and takes advantage of that opportunity and says, hey, sorry, your dog died. What's going on? How are you feeling? Well, I'm really sad. I can't imagine life without my dog. I've had that dog since I was born. And the drug dealer's really sweet and empathetic and says, I'm
Right.
so sorry you're feeling that way, but I have something that'll make you feel better. And our
Yeah.
kids, low decision-making moments can lead to some really bad things.
Right. And Snapchat can do things to prevent this from
Mhm.
happening.
So,
It's
in my opinion, and I have to say that so they don't sue me, right? In my opinion, Snap is still the largest open air drug market that we have, especially when it comes to our adolescents. I do these listening sessions, and every time I have one, I'm expecting these young people to tell me something new. Oh, nope, it's moved to this platform, and it's still always Snapchat. They still
wow.
always say Snapchat. So, I mean, they are who they are, right? They it's hard because they publicly put out how they've put things in place, right? And they've got the parent center, which is absolutely better than nothing, but it still doesn't let you see what your kid's talking about. It's still
Right.
not foolproof. They can do better. They can put more protections in place to make it a lot more safer for our youth, But what happens is when they dial up those protections, profits go down. They don't have as much data to sell about our kids, and so they're putting profits over people. And then the other thing too is Snap recently in January Evan Spiegel was in that big tech hearing where he said that he would support the Cooper Davis Act, which is actually a bill where they have to report drug content to the
Mm-hmm.
authorities, and then they would support the Kids Online Safety Act, which you're probably familiar with, which implements a duty of care, which is my favorite part of that bill.
Right.
So he said he support these things, but then the next day, Snap launches their ad campaign that says that they're not social media. That
Oh,
they
they're
never
not
were.
social media.
They're not so surprised.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah, people can look that up. It's unbelievable. They have a commercial, they have billboards. It's less social media, more Snapchat, which we counter with more Snap, more problems.
Yeah. Oh, Amy, it's so hard. Um, you mentioned at the beginning how Alexander came to you and told
Mm-hmm.
you that he had experimented with drugs and he felt it had a hold on him. And I just, the trust that he
Mm-hmm.
had in you to tell you about this it's just remarkable. And the fact that fentanyl is such a dangerous drug, um, you know, and that led to his death. But I do think that there's something really powerful about kids trusting their parents with
Mm-hmm.
when they're experimenting with drugs or with what they're doing. So I'd love to hear how you talk to parents about this and what advice do you give them when they are resistant or they feel like they have a absolutely no tolerance for drug policy at home. Like, what do you
Well,
say?
that those zero tolerance policies, I don't know how far they get a lot of families, but that's usually where like the wild child comes in, right? You want to do everything that your parents tell you not to because they're telling you not to, and what do parents know to begin with, right?
Right.
We were really fortunate to have such a close relationship with Alex. In fact, his biggest complaint about us as parents was that he overshared with us, and I took that as a win. Like that's a compliment as far as I'm concerned. But it took us really having to learn how to listen to him too, because there'd be times where he'd share something with me and I'd go into problem solving mode,
Mm-hmm.
and that might not be what he was looking for at that time. So we have to kind of know what our kids are looking for in that conversation, and maybe we have to start and ask questions. I would ask Alex when he'd come to me like, okay, am I listening to listen because you need to vent, or are we looking to solve problems at the end of this? And he'd answer me, and most of the time it was a little bit of both, but it helped him, I think, come to us a lot more often than maybe he would have, because that kid would tell us stuff all the time, and I'd always be like, I can't believe he just told us that. I can't believe he just told us that. But I was grateful. I was grateful for all those moments and all that
Yeah.
sharing that he did with us.
And so what
So
advice do you have for parents when their kid comes to them and says, I'm experimenting with drugs?
okay, don't freak out. We can't freak out, right? It's an emergency situation, and just like with any emergency, the number one rule is you stay calm.
Right.
Stay calm, listen to everything they have to say, do not minimize it, and you have to get help right away, whether or not your kid wants it. I mean, they might be like, I have this problem, but I don't want to talk about it. I don't want you to tell anybody. I don't want you to call the doctor. But if I had a 14-year-old come to me today and say, hey, I'm have this problem, it would be an emergency room visit. I would take them to the emergency room, because this kid, as soon as the effects wear off, is going to go into withdrawal, and they're going to need help while you're
Mm,
trying to figure out the bigger picture help.
right.
I would not leave their side either. I would not, I just want to go see my friends before I go to treatment. Oh man, don't do that. Don't do we have to watch them like a hawk at that point.
Yeah. I imagine it's a really tricky line to walk, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
our kids are probably going to rebel
Mm-hmm.
when we're saying, nope, you have to go to the emergency room. You can't leave my
Mm-hmm.
side. But
You, you,
yeah,
you know
what
the
advice do
other
you have about like
Well, I
managing that
think the
tension?
other thing too is there are kids. So I guess the good news is we can force them into things still, because we're still responsible for them. But the other thing too, if you have your suspicions, or if they haven't actually said anything, but you're nervous about it, or you want to know what's going on, I would just ask my kiddo, hey, I heard about this thing, fentanyl. Have you ever heard of it? And one thing our teens love to do is to know more than us, right? And this is
Right.
an opportunity for them to do that. Same thing with social media. Hey, I heard about drugs on Snapchat. Have you ever seen anything like that? The way they respond to those questions is going to tell you everything you need to know. If there's red flags raised there, because they're gonna either like, oh, freak out and be like, oh no, I don't know anything about that, and then there's your suspicion, or they're gonna know a whole wealth of information, and then that might be cause for concern.
Right.
So I'm just glad I asked them, innocently asked them, you know,
Yeah.
I heard
Yeah.
this
I
podcast
love
today.
that.
This lady was talking about this. What do you know about that?
I saw something recently where they were sharing some parenting advice, and there was like this trick of like, you probably don't know about this, but I've heard something about fentanyl, and like it makes them
Oh,
feel
wait,
like,
mom, I know. Oh, da 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 da. And next thing you know,
yeah,
they're telling you friends, people who, oh yeah, these are the kids at school who do those type of thing. And now
right.
you're like, oh, you might get way more information than you bargained for, but it'll be
That's,
helpful.
that's helpful and better. And I just want a plus, don't freak out. That just
Yeah.
seems like the
Number
the
one, don't
most
freak out.
important thing. And it's so hard, but like take a deep breath, listen, yeah, and support them in that moment. And freaking out
Yeah.
is not the I'm saying that to myself because I'm a freaker outer
Okay.
with my kids all the time.
Oh, yeah.
So
But
I'm
there's
just
the
repeating
freak
it back
out.
to me.
I've had kids call me. One thing I'll tell them is that they can reach out to me uh, to figure out who your trusted adult is. They need to talk to
Yeah,
somebody, but they don't know who their trusted adult is. 9 times out of 10, it is their parent, but they just don't know how to
right,
approach their parent.
right.
And I just remember when Alex came to us that night, he's like, I got to talk. He was literally, I got to talk to you guys. And we sat down at the kitchen table and he proceeded to pour his heart out to us. And inside, I just was ready to break down and cry. And my heart I was so sad. But the thing that he said was, he said to us was like, I feel so stupid. So I know he's already feeling low about what happened. And the last thing I want to do was make him feel any lower than he was already feeling. In
Right.
fact, I was like, no, you coming to us is incredibly smart. That's the right thing to do. You recognized a problem and we're talking about it and we're going to get you help.
Yeah,
And it's just that level of calm and because you want to do everything you can to love them through it.
yeah. That's the way. That's the way. Love them through it.
Yeah.
So I mean, one thing I also wanted to talk to you about was Narcan, and I remember there was also a little bit of a controversy or a conversation among parents about whether you should have it. You should talk to your kids about it. Does that actually encourage them to experiment with drugs? And so I'm curious about what your take on that is,
Sure.
and you could explain more to our listeners what that is and what it does.
I think everyone should have naloxone. So Narcan is one of the brands of naloxone.
Okay.
Like I said, everybody should have it. It should be something as simple as having your first aid kit. This is Klexxado brand that I have. It's a really simple little nasal spray. I give these out. I'll give them to anybody who asks for them. And in fact, I tell teens that if they need it, they need to ask me for it. No questions asked, because it doesn't mean they need it. It might, but their circle of friends might need it. They might be hanging out in places that need it. And you're right. There is pushback though from some people. We shouldn't let teens have it because this is how it encourages their use. I'm like, well, we have fire extinguishers all around the place. Are people setting fires at random? No, they're not. Our kids are smart, and we should trust them with something like this. I did have an issue at a school where a girl asked me for it, and I had some in my backpack, so I gave it to her, and I left. Well, her mom found out, and the school freaked out on me about it. And I was like, we're having the wrong conversation here. Like, you need to talk to this young lady about why she thinks she even needs it in the first place. And their light bulb went off like, oh, yeah, we're not thinking clearly here. We just have an upset parent. And I said, I would be happy to talk to her mom and smooth things over if we need to. So they let me back in that school. So things went okay there. But it's just crazy that we wouldn't give our kids things to help them help each other, or not even each other, but it could be anywhere. This could happen anywhere. You could be with your family at the concert in a park and somebody goes down right in front of you.
Right.
I will tell you, it's really easy to use. It looks like this. It literally goes up the nose. You press the plunger, and that medicine that comes out of there gets between the opioid receptors of the brain and the opioid that's landing on the brain. You still need to call 911. You still need to, if you're comfortable giving CPR, administer CPR. But how do you know somebody needs it? Like, they're unconscious. They just go unconscious really quick, or you come upon them and they're unconscious. You can look for dilated pupils, the shallow labored breathing, maybe no breathing at all, and then you give them this. The great thing about naloxone is that if you use it on someone and they don't need it, it will not hurt them. Like, your dog could eat it and your dog is going to be fine. And you keep giving naloxone and CPR until paramedics arrive and can take over for you. It could save a lot of lives, especially when these kids are in places that you just don't know. I mean, we've had kids
Yeah.
collapsing on school campuses, and
Yeah.
this could make all the difference.
That's so helpful to understand and to know how to use it and to see it. I actually had never seen what it looked like, so thank
Oh,
you for showing
yeah.
me. And yeah, it's just like it's a tool, you know?
Hmm.
Why would you not equip your kids with all the tools that they need to survive
Exactly.
today's world? So
Exactly. Everybody
thank
should
you
get
so
it in their
much for
first aid
that.
kit or backpack
Yeah.
or wherever.
And my understanding is that it's available for free at
If
a
you
lot of
type in
places.
free naloxone near me, it's spelled Naloxone. Things will come up. Things will come up to
Okay.
get it. I'm waiting on my shipment of 2,500. I get it donated to me, and then I give it out. I mean, the amazing thing is, I do a lot of community events. I've had people come to me at community events and like, hey, I got naloxone from you guys. I can't believe I actually had to use it. And then they'll share a
Wow.
story with us on how they've saved lives. Yeah, it's happened at least 4 times. My sister's a flight attendant. She saved somebody in the air.
That's
It's
such a
crazy.
powerful story. That's incredible. If you could give our listeners, just our parents who are listening, one piece of advice about how to keep their kids safe from fentanyl, what would you say to them?
When it comes to the increase in youth death along and youth substance use is all in direct correlation with the rise of social media. So first of all, if you can keep your kids off of it, keep them off of it as long as they can, as you possibly can. If you're already there, you got to spend time there. Follow what they're following. I know nobody wants to hear this, but you got to follow what they're following. A couple times a week, take 5 to 10 minutes and look at the For You content that's being pushed at them. Get your kids to follow a positive content. Doesn't mean they might engage with it, but it might scroll through and maybe a little bit of drug prevention might sink into their brain and they might get the message subconsciously. So really putting those safeguards in place and being able to spot check it, being able to do those things has got to be part of the deal. And I know if you've got an older kid, it's been on it for a while, it's going to be a lot harder to go back. So keep talking to them about it. They will listen. They will listen, whether they are listening respectfully or paying attention. It's going to seep in, but you got to keep doing it. And we can't shy away from these conversations.
Okay. This has been such a important and educational conversation, but it's been heavy. So I'd love to end with a little bit of hope. And I hear that you're talking to teens all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything that they're sharing with you that they're saying that gives you hope right now?
I'm always impressed with the kiddos that come to me like, you know what, they'll delete Snapchat right in front of me, or they're like, I'm not on social media. My parents keep me off of it, but now I understand why. And and then the ones who are like, I'm going to be that voice of reason among my friends. I know that I can do that. I'm up for the task, and they want to be involved and create a better future for themselves and their peer group and the kiddos that are coming up behind them. So as long as we keep building those numbers, we're going to get somewhere with this.
Are you on social media?
Our website is ANF, so Alexander Neville Foundation, ANFhelp.org. Everything's at the at ANF Help. Everything comes up under that. So you can find more information about us at ANFhelp.org or AlexanderNevilleFoundation.org. And all of our social media is at the at ANF Help.
Thank you so much, Amy. This has been, like I said, so informative, and it's so inspiring to hear how you've turned just the most horrible heartbreak into action and the difference that you're making in so many families' lives.
I'm so grateful that you're having me today. We need to talk about this issue. The fentanyl crisis is gratefully impacting our adolescents, and thank you for recognizing the importance of that.
Thank you so much for all you do.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.